Welcome to Hack Your Happiness.
Are there indicators, concrete indicators that you can use to read somebody else's emotional state? And the answer is there are none.
Are you a teen or adult looking for more happiness in every day and ways to connect with people in your life?
You've come to the right place. Hack Your Happiness is a podcast designed to bring you the behind the scenes of what brings iconic individuals happiness, plus their life hacks.
I'm Mercedes.
And I'm Anastasia.
And we're the two teens behind Small Bits of Happiness.
We're interviewing Olympic athletes, entrepreneurs, celebrities, and more.
Throughout all of our episodes, you'll find great conversations, hacks that you can take away and try in your life, inspiration, as well as unique and surprising insights. Today, we are speaking with Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett.
Well, I had a very tumultuous teenage journey, but I loved school.
Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett.
Renowned neuroscientist Lisa Feldman Barrett.
Lisa Feldman Barrett.
Distinguished professor of psychology at Northeastern University, Dr. Barrett is among the top 1% most cited scientists. What would you say are your top 3 tips for teens to manage their constantly changing emotions?
When you feel like something is dreadfully wrong, it probably means
What are key and tangible indicators of other people's emotions?
none. We do not read other people.
I don't even know if you could say that it's a trend. People saying, when I'm rude to you, it's like, it's just funny. We're so close.
It is not okay to be mean. There is a cost.
Welcome to Hack Your Happiness. Welcome, Dr. Barrett.
Thank you so much for having me on your podcast.
Yes, thank you for joining us. You are an iconic psychologist and professor, and we're thrilled to have you with us today. So take us back to the beginning of your journey to when you were a teen. How did you find your interest in neuroscience?
Well, I had a very tumultuous teenage journey. I had a hard family life, but I loved school. I had great teachers who really invested their time in me, and I also was not very confident about my about my intellectual abilities. Like I don't know if it's still the case with people in your generation, but in my generation, girls you weren't typically valued for your brains. And so I didn't really have a lot of confidence about how smart I was or what I could do. It never occurred to me that I could be a scientist. Is that still a thing?
I think it depends a lot on the environment and, kind of the values instilled in you. I think it's probably definitely still an issue in some places, but I think there's a lot more, icons and idols and female scientists who've changed, the course of science that we learn and talk about. And so I think that in a lot of ways it's improved.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I didn't really have that so much, but I did have teachers who really invested in me. I had one math teacher when I was in 8th grade and 9th grade who taught me, he taught me computer science, basically, like really rudimentary computer science, because he thought I would be good at it. And I had science teachers who spent extra time with me just because I was super interested in biology and physiology. I always loved physiology, actually. And I also, I went to school in Canada, and we had grade 13 in Canada. So here everybody finishes with 12th grade, but we had a 13th grade. And in that year, I decided to take a weightlifting class, which also was a physiology class. So the gym class in grade 13 was a weightlifting class. So I was there with these hulking. I'm 5'2". I was there with football, the football team basically, who were taking this class also. But the thing that I found really interesting was not just learning all the muscles and tendons and nerves and so on, but it was also a physiology class, and I really, really liked that. So for me, when I went to university, I mostly took science classes, even though when I was in high school, I spent a lot of time also in art classes and in literature classes and history. I loved history, actually. In in English class, I was actually reading philosophy, and I don't think I knew that it was philosophy. I thought it was, but I was reading existential philosophy. So I had an English teacher who basically taught a course in existential philosophy, but as an English course. So we were reading all of these. We were reading Camus and like all of these existential texts, but I was reading them as novels. But I just really gravitated to science. And when I was in university, I took physiology, I took anthropology, which I loved, but it was really the bones, it was like the physical anthropology, biological anthropology. That was what I was really most interested in. I even at a certain point thought I would go to medical school, but I realized kind of early on that in university that I don't like being bossed around. I don't like being told what to do. I kind of want to do my own thing, which meant medical school would not be a good fit for me. That being said, I want to emphasize that it's not like I thought, oh, I'm really good at this, and so I'm going to just pursue it as a career. I came from a really impoverished background, so my main concern when I was in university was to get a job that I could support myself with. And it never occurred to me in a million years, like professor or lab director or neuroscientist was not on my list of job options. Like it didn't occur to me that that would be something that I could do or that was even within the realm of possibility for me. And it really wasn't until I was in graduate school. I mean, I went to graduate school in clinical psychology expecting to be a therapist because that is a good paying job. It wasn't until probably my 4th year of graduate school that I realized, wait a minute, these professors, they think I can be a professor. Like, wait a minute, what is that about? Does that make sense?
We just want to quickly say, check out our happiness wellness products designed by us for individuals of all ages to help you bring a small bit of happiness to your home with our tangible tips and tools. Check them out in the show notes. Yeah, I think it's so cool how, you have such like a relatable experience growing up. I think a lot of teenagers feel as though, well, I'm moving out and now I have to sustain myself and I want to make sure that I can, get a good paying job. Yeah. And maybe that means I can't follow what I'm truly passionate or interested in. But I really love how, your story shows at the end of the day, if you're really passionate about something, it's possible to make a good career out of it. And I also I think it's funny because we're also from Canada. So we have 12th grade, but our parents also finished grade 13. So did you grow up in Ontario as well?
I did. I grew up in Toronto, and you guys are in Calgary. You're in Calgary. Yeah. So my sister's family lives in Edmonton actually now for a long time. And my nephew lived in Calgary for a while, although he's back in Edmonton. But yeah, so I guess it's a generational thing, but I don't think grade 13 exists anywhere, anywhere in any country anymore. But I will say it was I'm really glad that I had that year because I was able to, one thing that I would say that again, I didn't do this deliberately, but it is something I did was I allowed myself to be curious about things that I didn't know if I would like them or not. So, and I think that's what grade 13 in some ways for me was. It allowed me to take courses I wouldn't normally take. And this was also true in university that, of course, I had requirements and so on and so forth, but I also took, I took a history of physics course and I took an astronomy course. And these are not necessarily things that I would have, if you had said to me, are you interested in this? I wouldn't have said, oh, yes, it's like a burning desire to know this. No, it was just that even with physiology, I didn't start off with physiology or neuroscience thinking, oh, I'm really interested in this. It's just I took a course and I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Or philosophy. So it turns out, I've read a lot of philosophy, and I now am writing about philosophy of science quite a bit. But the first philosophy course I took when, in high school, I said, I was reading philosophy. I didn't really know it was philosophy. But in university, I took a philosophy course, and I was like, what is this? Like, I really didn't. It wasn't until many years later that I realized, wait a minute. That was really good, interesting, and useful information. So I think a really good thing it's good to follow your dreams, but it's also good to just be curious. Just be curious and make opportunities, curate opportunities for yourself to learn something new. One thing my husband says, which I think is really, really useful advice, is that he says that the job he has didn't even exist when he was in school. And you don't know what jobs are going to exist or what jobs you can make for yourself. So if you continuously kind of curate or cultivate your curiosity, this will open paths for you that you might not even be able to imagine now.
Yeah, I think that it's so important, like, to take away from that amazing story is that what's important to do is, like, let's say, like, again, like, you want to be like a doctor or you want to be somewhere in the science field. It's totally okay to then take a philosophy class if that's something that you think could be cool, that you're curious about. You're just gonna try out a little bit. And I think that that's definitely really important to think about, because sometimes we just think, oh, I'm just going to put my 100% of myself towards this one thing that I love, but you're not even looking around to see, is there anything else I could be interested in? Let me try it out. And you never know where that could take you. And even if you don't have a career in philosophy or English later on, that's totally okay, because you still learned something, you still took something with you. And I think that's the point of us, just to keep learning and always expand our knowledge.
I was going to say that I think you're absolutely right. And I think your example of medicine is a really good one. So philosophy, it turns out, is very, very useful for you as a practicing physician, but even more so, some of the best-selling science books, or popular science books, or best-selling novels are actually written by physicians who are interested in telling a really good story. And there's the Emperor of Maladies. There's all of trying to remember his name, very famous neurologist. Oliver Sacks wrote these really, really entertaining stories, but also he was a practicing physician. And so I think when we grow up, we're sort of given a set of options by the people who teach us, but you can make your own options if you are curious and you create opportunities for yourself. And anybody can do that. I think my life is proof that anybody can do that, even when they labor under non-optimal circumstances.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that your journey has been so amazing and you've accomplished so much. And throughout your entire journey and career, what do you think your most significant challenge has been, and how did you overcome this?
Well, I think the first thing I want to say, Anastasia, is that I don't think about that I have not accomplished things on my own. So I like to remind people that there's something called the great man theory of science, because mostly the scientists we've heard about are men. But the idea is that the idea that there's one person who changed everything or who discovered something, that's never true. It's never true. It's not true with Darwin. It's not true with Einstein. It's not true with anybody. Everybody is always working in a community of people. So I'm kind of the front person for a very large group of people, some of whom I've trained, actually, a large number of whom I've trained. And so I would say that's the first point that I want to make. Now I'll answer your question. My most significant obstacle, I would say there have been two obstacles that have been significant, and maybe three. One is that I just had no confidence in myself. I, grew up thinking I was sort of stupid and not even, not insightful in any way. I often would think of things in a different way than other people. I would ask questions that were really different than the questions that my classmates would ask. I just saw things differently, and that made me feel weird, as opposed to special, or that I maybe had a different point of view that was really, really valuable. And I wish I could give you the story that we often hear. We hear a story of great adversity, and then the person has faith in themselves and they overcome their adversity, and it's a big hero story, big like triumph. I don't really think that's my story. I think that I was fortunate to have people around me also who gave me small encouragements just by answering my questions or being interested in my opinion, or and for me that was enough, so what I would say is that for anybody who has a troll in their head, telling them that they're not good enough, or that, you just have to remember, don't feed your troll. And it's just electrical activity in your brain. And sometimes you just have to ignore it. Feeling bad doesn't mean something is wrong all the time. It could mean that you're just doing something really hard. And, my trainer, I have a physical trainer, like a coach who I've had for like 20 years. I've been working out with this guy. He's like one of the few people who can actually tell me what to do, and I will listen to him. I pay him to tell me what to do, right? And he tells me that, you never know, when you're like physically exercising, this might not happen. You guys might be too young and this maybe hasn't happened to you yet, but sometimes you're exercising so hard that you get to the brink of wanting to just like hurl your cookie. You just want to throw up. It's just, you feel like nauseated to the point where you're not really sure you can continue. And my trainer tells me, well, that's when real change happens. Well, it doesn't mean that you're physically overtaxing yourself. It means that's when you've sort of hit the wall, and now real physical change is happening. I use that as a metaphor for life. Like when something is super hard and I think I can't do it and I just feel like I can't go on, that's the time to have a rest, get a hug, and keep going, because it means that you're probably about to have a breakthrough. So that's one thought. The second thing I think that's been was a challenge, like a real challenge for me, was that I'm a woman in science. It's better, as you said, Mercedes, but it's not good yet, right? So I'm a woman in science who's challenging the dominant viewpoints in my field. It's hard for anybody to do it. It's really harder for a woman to do it. But like I said, I'm not doing it by myself. And I have a lot of support I have a core group of friends who are my colleagues, but also they're my friends. We've all grown up as professors together, and we all support each other. And I really don't think that I could have done it without them, because they were there at key moments when my confidence was faltering, or when I just needed that extra kind of shove, I think that I think that I've done that for, we all do that for each other, basically. So this is also really important. I would say. Yeah. So those are probably the two things that I would think of as the hardest things I've done.
Yeah, I get it. I mean, I think that having a supportive community in every aspect of life just makes it that much easier to, overcome it. At least you're kind of climbing over the hurdle together, right? You have someone to talk to, you have someone to support you. If you're all alone going through anything challenging, it just feels so much more difficult and isolated.
Yeah, and I would say too, Mercedes, peer pressure is not something that only exists in high school. It exists everywhere and in science. And think about what happens if you wear clothes that are different from what other people wear, or you, I don't know, speak differently, or you use different words, or maybe, you don't like the same music as everybody else. You can catch a lot of shit for that. And this is also true in science. It's probably true in every community, but luckily, if you have some people who see things the way that you do, you'll be okay.
Absolutely. It's all about kind of finding the people who, care about you and align with you. And I think that is so fundamental to getting through those tough times. And I think that it's like the concept to your first point, like of growing pains, right? It's like right when you hit the hardest point in anything, like as long as, of course, like you're in a safe environment, but considering the fact like you're trying to get to a new goal, you're trying to, become, maybe wake up earlier or try to become a better version of yourself, whether it's academically or physically or even like emotionally, socially, putting yourself out there in situations can be so challenging, but that's when you can grow. Because if there's like this saying that's like, if nothing changes, then nothing changes, right?
Exactly.
If you're not changing, and that's not easy, but if you're not like pushing yourself, then you're never going to be able to grow in any sense.
Exactly. And those uncomfortable moments sometimes are the key, because if then you're able to push through one uncomfortable moment and you're starting to face another one, you're like, well, I was able to face the last one, I'm sure I can, go through this one.
That
and
self-confidence.
Then exactly, you get that confidence, and it kind of starts
yeah.
like getting bigger and bigger, and then eventually you're able to do those uncomfortable things.
And so you've done a lot of research on the side of emotions and that in our brain. So knowing that being a teen is obviously a time of a lot of emotional change and mood swings, what would you say are your top 3 tips for teens to manage their constantly changing emotions?
The top 3 tips are, the first tip is going to sound so boring, and I'm going to sound like a mother, and I am a mother, but I'm actually saying this as a neuroscientist. Get enough sleep. Get off your screens 2 to 3 hours before you need to go to sleep. Get enough sleep so that when you wake up in the morning, you feel well rested, and take care of your body. The reason why I'm saying this is that your brain's most important job is regulating the systems of your body and coordinating them in a metabolically efficient way. We don't experience ourselves that way. We don't experience every hug we get, every insult we bear, every action we take. We don't experience our lives as, as having our emotions even, as having anything to do with the brain's most basic function, which is regulating the body in a metabolically efficient way. But that is what's happening under the hood. Your brain is always talking to your body. Your body is always sending signals back to your brain, even when you're sleeping. And our brains don't make us aware of everything going on inside here. Instead, we experience the metabolic changes in our bodies as mood, as feeling pleasant or unpleasant, feeling worked up, feeling calm, feeling fatigued, feeling energetic. And so mood is not emotion. Mood is, or what, scientists like me would call affect, is a property of consciousness. It's with you always. So when you're feeling like pretty good about something, it probably means that your brain's having a pretty reasonable time regulating your body. When you feel like something is dreadfully wrong with the world, it probably means there's something metabolically taxing happening. And adolescence is a time in life where there's a lot of metabolic upheaval because hormones are metabolic regulators. So it means that if you are going through puberty that takes like a long time. It's not just when you get your period or just when you start to grow facial hair or whatever, it's a long process. That means that your body is just harder. All things considered, it's harder to manage. So it's really important to get enough sleep and, drink enough water, get enough exercise, eat healthfully, don't eat so much junk food. It's actually really bad for your mood to do that over the long run. So, listen, I love French fries. I love French fries. But, so I'm not saying I never eat them, but I always eat them in moderation and never if I'm already stressed. Because all stress is your brain making a prediction that there's about to be the need for a big metabolic outlay. That's what stress is. And it's nothing more than that. But little stresses can add up over time to a big problem. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is your brain functions predictively. It doesn't react to things that are happening in the world or even in the body. It's making predictions all the time. Again, it doesn't feel that way, but that is what is happening. Your brain is making predictions. Anything which is persistently uncertain. So uncertainty is very metabolically expensive for a brain because it makes it really hard to predict what to do next. So uncertainty is necessary for learning, but it's also expensive. So that's important to know because, for example, if you make yourself predictable to other people, they'll be more predictable to you, and that's a benefit, right? Like all things considered, that's a benefit. But if you surround yourself with people who are who are kind of chaotic and who are unpredictable regularly, if you live in a family where, your parents or your siblings or somebody in your friends or whatever in your world is just prone to, outbursts or unpredictability, that's going to be like a tax on your brain's efforts to regulate your body. So I think it's really important to find people who allow you to be your best self. And what that means is finding people who are predictable to you, who you understand and who understand you well enough to reduce uncertainty. Because adolescents have a tremendous amount of uncertainty. If you think about it, you went from, grade school where your classes were small and, usually the people in your lives there was like a limited number of people who you were interacting with. And then you go to middle school or high school and you've got this like very large now group of really large community people, humans are like really, really hard to predict, right? Like the best thing for your nervous system is another human. The worst thing for your nervous system is another human. So you've got that uncertainty. Your brain has the uncertainty of like what's going on in your body with all the hormones and stuff. Now you also have, if you're on social media, the environment is just larger and has more uncertainty in it. And you're worried about your future. And, so there's just like this massive load on your nervous system that you didn't have when you were a kid. And you're more vulnerable to mood disorders, to mood, problems with your mood, because mood is a barometer to how well your brain is regulating your body, if that makes sense. So I think what this means is that when you're feeling if you're feeling exhausted or you're feeling really, really unpleasant, like distressed, try really hard not to think this means there's something wrong with me. It could mean that there's something that your environment needs to change, or it could mean that your brain's just having a really hard time regulating your body and you just need to try to take care of yourself a little more. The third thing I would say is you have more control over your emotions than you think you do. And I think as an adolescent, it's harder because you don't have complete control over your life. I mean, even when you're an adult, you don't have complete control over your life. But you do have more control than you think that you do. Because emotions are not, the narrative that still a lot of doctors use and it's popular in the media is that you're born with circuits for emotion but the circuits for cognition and rationality have to develop over time. So you've got these, you've got these emotion circuits which are being triggered all the time and can't really be controlled very well by your cognitive side or your cognitive parts of your brain. And so you have like this emotionally tumultuous like life. This is true in childhood. It's supposedly true in adolescence. It's not, but that narrative is wrong. That's not how the brain works. That's not really what's happening to you. Emotions are not built into your brain from birth. They're built by your brain in the moment. And there are ways to cultivate experiences for yourself that will make it easier for your brain, give your brain more flexibility, more options for how to experience what's happening in here. And this is possible even for adolescents. And I'm just going to say that a fourth thing, because even though you only asked me for three, I'm going to say a fourth thing. I think it's really important to understand that we are the caretakers of each other's nervous systems. It is not okay to be mean and rude to people. There is a cost to doing that. And there's sort of a casual brutality in the way that people speak to each other, in the what you see in the movies and on television and in YouTube. That, there's a casual brutality as if it's funny. And in fact, there are shows where people are horribly mean to each other to a laugh track. And it seems like this is an okay way to be, but it really isn't an okay way to be. And one of the things you're doing when you're an adolescent is you're figuring out who you want to be. What kind of a person do you want to be? Do you want to be somebody who's a drag on somebody else's nervous system? Or do you want to be somebody who's a help? And you may think that saying whatever's on your mind, and it's your right to say whatever you want, and it's the other person's problem if they're hurt by it or whatever. That kind of attitude comes back to haunt you. There's a Buddhist notion of karma, that that whatever you put into the world, you get back in spades. And your actions, the things you say to each other, the way you act towards each other, you're basically cultivating a niche, an environment that you live in. What do you want that environment to look like? So how do you want that environment to feel for you? I think this is really important because I think a lot of the cruelty and meanness that happens in high school are people just trying out who they want to be. And then many years later, there's like a trope, that many years later people go back to their high school reunions and apologize to everybody because they were such assholes when they were adolescents. I just think it's really important to understand that every time you're kind to someone, it's like you're making a little deposit in, you're making things a little easier for them. And every time you're cruel, it's like you're forcing them to pay a little tax. And over time, this adds up, and it actually will impact you in the end. So it's all things considered, if you have a choice, be kind.
I love that so much. I mean, all of your tips were absolutely fantastic. They're amazing. And I love how, well you explain them, because for me, I love understanding why. Like, why does sleep make me feel less stressed? Why does being tired make me feel stressed? Why does doing this, like, knowing the science behind it is so powerful, because then it's justifying all of your actions and why you're doing something to feel better. And what I really want to say is, to your fourth hack of being kind to others and, not spending time with people who bring you down and make you feel poor about yourself, is so important, because I 100% agree. There's like, I don't even know if you could say that it's a trend, but it's people saying like, oh, when I don't know, at least this is what I've witnessed in high school, and like on social media online, is like people saying, when I'm rude to you, it's like, it's just funny. We're so close. We're good friends. Like, I feel like we can kind of like, joke mean things at each other, or call each other stupid, or these types of things. But it really does take a toll on you. And I think that it if you're spending time with someone who's your friend, but they're, kind of almost bullying you in a sense by consistently, repeating mean remarks, it's like, well, that's not a friend. And then it gets into your brain, because you trust what this person is saying since they're your friend, but they're telling you mean things. It
and
makes
then sometimes
you
get a bit confused, because you're like, are they genuinely angry at me? Do they think I'm actually stupid, or are they just saying this for jokes?
And what are you describing here? You're describing uncertainty. And again, I'll say, uncertainty is not bad in and of itself, but it's metabolically expensive. And if you splurge if you have to spend all of your energy trying to negotiate, uncertainty in every waking moment of your life, you don't have the spoons left to actually engage with uncertainty when you need to, which is when you're learning something new, or when you're deliberately exposing yourself to something novel. And I just want to tell you this anecdote, because I think it's just really, I think it really speaks to what you guys are saying. So a couple of years ago, I was this is right after I published 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. And I was at one of my first luncheons after, like COVID was still going on, but it was like one of the first times that I was out, like at an event. And it was a very fancy event. And there were very important people at this event, like the chancellor of certain universities, very, very, very important, powerful people. And we're in this very, fancy place, and we're having this very serious discussion. And we're having this very serious discussion about what at that point felt like a crisis in mental health for adolescents. Okay, like this idea that there's been this crisis has been going on now for a couple of years, that people have realized it. But this was, I was sitting with a president of a university, a chancellor of a university. So not my university, other universities, but still. And I was saying, well, it's really important to look at these problems from, from an evolutionary standpoint. Why do we have brains? What's the brain's most important job? When you start asking yourself these questions, a lot of things start falling into place that make a lot of sense. And I made this point about uncertainty, I made this point about cruelty and uncertainty. And, so I sort of was listing the things that I thought were kind of adding up. Each thing on its own isn't a make or break problem, but when you add them all up together, this is how cause works. All of these weakly causal factors add together to make a big effect. Okay. So I say this, and then the chancellor of this very important university says, well, are you saying that we have to coddle students? Are you, Are you saying that, that they can't take, they can't take a little ribbing or that they can't be criticized? And of course, I wasn't saying that at all. I think it's important to be able to hear critical feedback. But in order to have the spoons to hear it, to really hear it and do something with it, you can't have the rest of your life be in chaos. And so she wasn't really getting my point. And so I waited a couple of minutes, and then I said to her, out of the just a few minutes later, now we're on to a different aspect of the conversation. I said, "Hey, bitch, could you pass me the butter?" And she just looked at me and I'm like, so you're probably wondering when I said, "Hey, bitch," in that tone, did I mean, "Hey, honey, will you pass me the butter?" Or maybe I was insulting you? Maybe I was talking to you like you're now, like we're buds, That's uncertainty. So imagine your every interaction you have, or like many interactions you have with people that you know and respect and like and have trusted in the past, talk to you like that. All these little things really add up over time. And, at the end, she was like, "Oh my God, that was thank you for doing that. That was a really great experience. I don't think I really understood what you were driving at until you did that." And I'm like, yeah, so I think part of what you're saying, Mercedes, about needing to understand the science, I think is right. I'm like that too. But I also think that sometimes people need an experience. They have to be shown. They have to experience what you're talking about before they'll really believe it.
I think so too, and I think that kind of almost goes to what you were talking about those growing pains, and how right when you are at the pinnacle of your adversity, you can learn from that, and that's the experience that you can say, okay, this is really tough. I don't like how I feel. And so how am I going to change my environment? I mean, of course, it depends on the adversity that you're in.
It doesn't. It doesn't. It doesn't. And let me say why. It does. Of course, it does. But I do want to say this. Sometimes we can't change our physical environment. But you can always change what you pay attention to. This is the whole science of meditation. You can pay attention to, you can choose what you pay attention to, even in brief moments, to give your nervous system a break. And in those moments, even if you're sitting in the same place and you're surrounded by the same context, if you change what you pay attention to, you've changed the situation for yourself, even briefly. I think that this is what kids do, and probably what adolescents do too, when they have had a hard day and then they get on YouTube and they just want to watch funny videos or cat videos or whatever. What they're doing is they're attempting to modify their environment. And I just think that there are certain ways that will be more productive for you to do that. Can I just say one other thing? I'm going to give you a fifth hack too, and that is, when you feel really distressed and when you feel like, I don't know, right before I would get my period every month, I would feel like the world was ending. I would just feel like something is really wrong with the world, or me, or there's something really wrong. I think it's important to understand that when that happens, the world feels like it shrinks. And you can't really see very far. And I think, and this comes from my own experience with my daughter, who, when she was an adolescent, she was depressed. The world is a big place. The world is a really big place. And no matter how bad you feel, no matter how bad things are, they won't always be like that. Even if it feels like they will, and even if you can't see your way out of it. I think it's important to know that. And there are ways you can remind yourself of that, even in your darkest moments. There are ways you can remind yourself that. So you're doing a favor for your future self when you do that.
Yeah, I think that's so important because, things will always get better. And whenever we feel like the world is so small and everything bad is happening and we can't do anything about it, just knowing the world is bigger than it seems. And just also kind of like, I like the idea of like zooming out and thinking in 5 years, when I've triumphed this problem and I've overcome it, how will I think about it? Will I think about it as, oh, this was really important for me to learn from? Or will I, still be really stressed about it and everything? Like, how will I think about it in 5-10 years and just kind of zooming out? I think that that's a really great strategy.
I think it can be tough for teens because we've lived through such a short part of our life, like in the grand scheme of things, but it seems like it's just like high school just keeps dragging on, and like it's like feels like life is going to be like this forever, when actually most of our life is not as a teenager.
And most of it is ahead of us, and we just feel so, like, because we've only really been in one stage of our life, or like, other than being a kid, so you just feel like it's going to be like this forever when it's not.
But you could imagine this. You could think to yourself, well, how old are you guys?
I'm 16.
I'm 14.
You could think to yourself, well, what would I tell my 8-year-old self now? Like, given the experiences I've had and the things I worried about when I was 8, or the things that concerned me, or the things I was curious about, what could I tell my 8-year-old self that would help? And then you can think, well, what will my 20-year-old self tell me, or my 30-year-old self? So I'll tell you that one time when I was traveling, I was like stuck in O'Hare Airport. I couldn't get home. My daughter was depressed, and she had she was being bullied at school, and she had a terrible experience. And she called me on the phone. She was crying, and I'm stuck in an airport, some number of thousands of miles away, and I'm not going to be able to get home tonight. And she's sobbing on the phone. And so I said to her, "Can I talk to your 18-year-old self?" Because she was 14 at the time, or 13. "Can I talk to your 18-year-old self?" Silence. And then I hear what I think she imagined her 18-year-old self to be. And we had a conversation. And I said, "Do you remember those girls who were really mean to you that day? Remember that day when I was stuck in Chicago and I couldn't get home and you were really upset? And do you even remember their names? Do you even remember like what they said?" And she said, "No, I can't. I really can't actually. But I was so upset that day." And I was like, "I know." And she's like, "Yeah, no, I can't." I'm like, "Oh, okay." Silence. And she said, "Thanks, Mom." I said, "Sure." I think that of course, you don't know what your 25-year-old self would say to you, but in moments, it's probably useful to imagine that.
Oh, I love that tactic. I think
that's so powerful.
Such a powerful way to kind of like get yourself out of your head, because I think we do that and it's not a good thing to do, and then you're just spiraling and like thinking about having a conversation with your older self and like just really zooming out of the moment.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like a lot of teens have really big problems with misunderstandings and jumping to conclusions about how others are feeling because of that. And as a neuroscientist who has conducted a lot of experience with emotions, which are what are key and tangible indicators of other people's emotions, like telling if another person's mad at us or sad or, in a certain type of mood.
You're asking me, are there indicators, concrete indicators that you can use to read somebody else's emotional state? And the answer is there are none. None. We do not read other people like we read words on a page. Facial movements are not always facial expressions of emotion, and when they are, They are not always stereotypic. People scowl about 35% of the time when they're angry. That's more than chance, but that means 65% of the time when they're angry, that's people from Western cultures. There's much more cultural variation in the expression of anger, but even within our own culture, 65% of the time on average, people are not scowling when they're angry. And about half the time when people scowl, they're not angry. They're concentrating really hard, or, you just told them a bad joke and like a pun, they're indicating their displeasure, or they're suffering from a bad moment of gas. People scowl for all kinds of reasons. Tone of voice is the same. So what I would say is that your brain is always guessing. It's always looking at other people's movements and listening to their tone of voice, and even it's taking in all of these sensory signals, even signals from your own body. It's the whole ensemble that the brain is attempting to make sense of. So I would say remain curious. No matter how confident you feel that you know how somebody else is feeling, you don't. And you should remain curious, and you can ask. You, yeah, if I'm going to trust anything, I'm going to say trust what they say. And if they look angry to you, but they say they're not angry, there's the question of like, well, who's right is not a scientific question, because the reality of the situation is you're experiencing them one way and they're experiencing something different. And that's what's real. And that's what has to be, that's what the situation is that has to be dealt with.
I think that's so important because, like Anastasia just said, so many teens start reading emotions, and I think that's when we can get into, the misunderstanding, and then you're like, oh, but you looked at me weird, and then I thought you didn't like me, when it really is like that you're just guessing, but you don't, maybe they're stressed, or maybe that's just their look when they're writing a hard test, right? That's how they look.
Exactly.
I think that a good habit that people should try getting more into is that just communication. If you're worried that someone's in a bad mood, they're sad, they're going through something, ask them instead of assuming that maybe it's directed towards you and something that you did. If you think that a friend's mad at you, ask them, like, are you feeling okay? You just look like you're in a bad mood. Like, asking people, I think, is the best way to know, because if they're really in a bad mood, maybe they are, but it's not specifically directed towards you.
Or maybe it would help them to, share that with someone that they trust and that cares about them.
Exactly. They may also not want to share it, but that's okay too. The point is that nobody reads anybody. Everybody is guessing. And in general, this is true. There is no body language. That's a really bad metaphor. Body movements don't have inherent meanings. And this is important. It's important when we're talking about emotion. It's also important when we're talking about consent of any sort. Words are not always clear, but they're much clearer. They're much clearer than body movements.
Absolutely. I think that's so true. So as our final question, I just wanted to ask you, something that we ask everybody is, what do you do daily that brings you a small bit of happiness?
What do I do daily that brings me a small bit of happiness? I have a bunch of things I do, actually. But I guess in the spring and summer, it would be, I go out to my garden every morning and I take care of my garden. So I'm always trying to cultivate something or grow something I've never grown. Like right now I'm trying to cultivate my blueberry bush. So I have all these cuttings, and I sort of think about them as, I actually call them my green babies, like I'm trying to get them to root, and so I'll usually do something like that. If it's the winter, then I'm probably taking care of something else. I really, because I guess even in the winter, I've got stuff in the basement that I've got grow lights, and I'm always trying to grow something, or, so I'm always taking care of something like that. I think the power of nature is miraculous, and I like to give myself a good dose of awe at least once a day. I think that it reminds me that I'm just a speck in a very, very big universe, and sometimes that's a comforting feeling. What do you guys do?
Oh, I think it varies for me. My favorite thing to do is honestly my morning routine. I love it. I listen to an audiobook and I get ready. I do like my hair and my makeup, and my favorite thing is my room has a massive window that faces the sunrise, so I'm getting ready and listening to my audiobook, and there's always like a beautiful sunrise.
Yeah, and for me, this kind of like helps, like what we touched on earlier is I love sleeping, and so whenever I get a chance to sleep in, I always take it. I love sleeping in. For me, I woke up at 9 today, 9 in the morning, and I was like, yeah, it was a bit of an early day today. Everyone's like, why are you up so early? Like my usual times are like 10, 10:30, 11. So
During the summer break.
Not during school, unfortunately.
Yes.
So
yeah,
I love sleeping.
So where can our audience find you if they want to keep up and learn more?
Well, I would say they could go to my website, lisafeldmanbarrett.com. I also have an academic website, but those are for technical papers, and but they could always, but on lisafeldmanbarrett.com, I have freely available all of the popular science writing that I've done for magazines and newspapers, and there are a lot of the podcasts that I've done, or links are posted there. That's probably the easiest way to keep up with what I'm doing. There's also, I think, a list of my speaking engagements and things like that.
Amazing. Yes, and thank you so much for joining us today. This has been so insightful. I think we both learned so much, and we just want to say thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness.
And thank you so much to Dr. Barrett for joining us today. We truly learned so much. Her insight and her explanation were all fantastic. Anastasia, what was your biggest takeaway of today?
I think my biggest takeaway is probably that you actually can't ever tell what another person is feeling unless you ask them. Because I think for sure, like, we oftentimes think, oh, if a person scowls, or if they're, like looking sad, they're probably sad, or if they scowl, they're mad. Like, we go with these like interpretations, but that doesn't always mean that it's true or not. We just assume, and then afterwards we can like get in our heads, why are they scowling? Are they scowling at us? And then we start to spiral, and it's just always better to ask. And I think in the end, communication is always key. What about you, Mercedes?
Totally. And I think one of my other biggest takeaways from today is how much of a toll uncertainty takes on us, like that feeling of no control, how much that can affect us, and how when we're in toxic relationships, toxic friendships, toxic environments, that can take such a toll on us emotionally. And that's the importance of having a supportive and positive environment, is that, you can predict and that people will treat you well, and you don't have to be worried about, are they going to be mean to me today, or are they going to pretend to be nice to me today? And I think that's something a lot of teenagers unfortunately deal with.
100%. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Hack Your Happiness. If you enjoyed, please leave us a 5-star review from wherever you're listening. It really helps us out, and we really appreciate it.
And also, join our happiness family. It really helps us out. It's completely free, and we'd love to have you. You can join our happiness family by following this podcast on whatever podcast listening platform you're on now. See you next time!